Well, welcome to our first round of our Grows as we look into this idea of the Fisherman's Guide to Overcoming Evil. I'm sitting here wearing my Atlanta United jacket here, and underneath here, just want to show this before, but United we conquered. And I just think it's important for us to kind of think of this word conquered, because this is the word nikeo in Greek, which we've been talking about, which is either you're going to be conquered or you're going to be conquer. And we're talking about this idea of overcoming evil, conquering evil, prevailing over evil with good. And the question we've been asking in this series with Forgive is how exactly do we do that? And so, as I mentioned last week in the intro video, we're going to be tackling this subject as we ask two people that I think should know a bit about how to overcome evil with good, how to prevail, how to conquer, how to keep going despite persecution, despite obstruction, despite just all kinds of things to overcome. And so we're going to be looking at 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And I think it's important as we read these texts to really kind of ask ourselves, well, who's writing these things? And what's the context? And why are they writing? And when are they writing these letters? And so I want you to think about the fact, like I said last week, that these letters are written by John and Peter. And when you think about these two, as we're going to find out when we get to Jesus Year 3 next month, is that these two are part of the three that are Jesus' inner circle, the inner core. And as Jesus spends more and more time pouring into his disciples as he prepares to leave in Jesus Year 3, he really takes these three aside often. As we're going to find out next month again, as we're going to see him take those three with him, kind of like out of the 12, he says, you guys need some special attention, because these are going to be the guys that really carry on the church and carry on Christianity, are the ones that are going to be teaching and kind of encouraging and coming alongside all these other churches and believers to encourage them in how to survive and how to make it. And so it's interesting to me that these guys saw it all. They were there. They were the first ones there at the resurrection. If you know the story in John's gospel, where John talks about how he was kind of younger and more fit, so he raced to the tomb and he got there first, but he didn't go in, and Peter just goes flying in, and they're the first ones to see that Jesus is not in the tomb. They're the ones that were there at the transfiguration a little bit before that, where they saw Jesus transfigured into who he was. It's like they just saw it all. And when they write these letters, a lot of time has passed. 1st Peter most likely was written somewhere around 63, 64 AD. So it's been like 30 years since Jesus was crucified, resurrected, and ascended into heaven. And so Peter has been going around these churches. In Acts, he's kind of started off and then kind of passed baton on to Paul, but he just keeps going. In fact, by the time we get to his letters, he's in Rome. Okay, think about that for a second. Peter, who was a fisherman, who grew up in Galilee, probably never moved more than 15, 20 miles from where he was born in Capernaum. And now he's where? He's in Rome, which he calls Babylon. He's writing these letters to the churches that the believers scattered throughout the empire, if you will. And John, by the way, John also, he's writing another 30 years after that. He's writing, and it's 90, okay? It's 90 AD, 90, somewhere between 90 and 95, and he's writing his letters. And so why are these guys writing these letters? Who's the audience? Well, the reason they're writing is because the church has expanded, and the church hasn't been easy. And it's dealing with a lot of persecution. By the time John writes, there's all kinds of false prophets, there's all kinds of false teachers saying all kinds of false things about Jesus. And so he's like, I got to write these people. I got to write them to correct them. I got to write them to make sure that they understand, how do we overcome evil? How do we overcome the darkness? How do we get past all the lies and all the false things being said about Jesus? Peter, he actually is writing at the end. 2nd Peter is written right before he's actually going to be martyred. And he says this. He says, so I will always remind you, in 2 Peter verse 1, chapter 12, so I will always remind you of these things, even though you know them and are firmly established in the truth you now have. I think it is right to refresh your memory as long as I live in this tent of this body, because I know that I will soon put it aside, as our Lord Jesus Christ has made it clear to me. And I will make every effort to see that after my departure, you will always be able to remember these things. And I think that's kind of the attitude of both Peter and John. They're like, hey, we're coming to the end. And we got to make sure we pass on this information on how do you overcome evil? How do you survive? How do you live out your faith in a hostile environment? What do you do when you're facing all kinds of trials? What do you do when the world seems like it's against you? What do you do when you feel like you're the only ones who are following Jesus in a world that is going against Jesus? And so that's what we're after in this series. And that's why I think it's important to understand that these guys know something about what it means to survive evil. If you think about John, his brother, James, he was one of the inner three too. And James was the very first of the disciples, the apostles, that was murdered for their faith, that was martyred. He was run through with a sword. And so John knows some pain. He knows some suffering. Peter has been beaten up. He's been thrown in prison. He's been all over. These two have taken some hits. And so I think that they might have some words of wisdom for us. How do we survive evil? How do we conquer? How do we prevail? How do we overcome? What do we need to do? And so as we dive into their words over the next 9 more sessions, I just want you to always be mindful of who's writing what you're reading. Who's writing what you're talking about? Are these guys just clueless? Are they just making stuff up? Are they just pulling trick, are just making stuff up? Or is this like they really know? And they have a heart that we would know, that they would pass it on to us. Because I think we live in a world that's starting to get a little chaotic and starting to get darker and darker. And so we need some help. We need some advice. And I believe that although Peter and John wrote to first century believers, I think they're also writing to us as 21st century believers saying, hey, it's the same story, same stuff, same advice that we would give you. And so as we sit down, I just want you to imagine these two kind of just sitting down, sitting on the couch and looking across at us and saying, well, let me share some stuff with you. Let me share with you how to have hope. Let me share with you how we need to love each other. Let me share with you what we need to do to overcome evil with good. Let me share with you my advice, what I have learned from sitting at the feet of Jesus for 3 years and being part of his inner 3 when he invested in me and now let me invest it in you. And so as we start, today we're going to be doing some of the introductions that they kind of share and some of the words that I really want you to think of as we look at 1 Peter chapter 1, a little bit of 2 Peter chapter 1, and a little bit of 1 John chapter 1. But just be mindful who's writing and why they're writing and why you should listen to them. So I hope you guys will have a great discussion as we continue. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.